Welcome to my channel. I hope today's story captures your interest and leaves you wanting more. Your continued support truly means a lot to me. Now, let's get started with the story.
My daughter-in-law jumped to her feet, pointed straight at my wife, and said, "Stand up and get out." That was how she opened her own birthday party. My wife arrived late. She was still recovering her steps, slow and unsteady. I thought the worst thing that night would be an awkward apology. I was wrong. There was no arguing, no chaos, just a cold, heavy silence. My son turned away, and only a few minutes later, the most important guests in the room did something that left the in-laws completely stunned. If you have made it this far into the story, subscribe to the channel so you do not miss what comes next, and leave a comment telling me where you are listening from. Now, come back with me, because what happened after that is what truly says everything. I did not react right away. At nearly 70, I had learned that silence is sometimes the only way to truly see a person. After that sentence, it was as if the air had been drained from the room. Yellow light reflected off crystal glasses, expensive dresses, carefully prepared smiles. Everything froze. My wife still gripped her wooden cane, her other hand trembling slightly. She did not understand why she had suddenly become the problem of the evening. Megan was never someone who demanded explanations. She lowered her head just a little, as if wondering whether she had actually done something wrong. I saw that moment. The moment when a woman who had spent her entire life teaching children kindness was suddenly forced to question her own worth in a room full of strangers. Mia sat back down almost immediately, as if she had only made a small reminder. She adjusted her dress, glanced around, waiting for approval. The Miller family sat across from me. They said nothing, but their eyes said enough. They were watching to see who had the right to decide whose value mattered in that room. I turned to look at my son. Ethan did not look at me. He checked his watch, a new habit I had noticed recently. Everything in his life now seemed measured in time and appearances. He let out a soft breath, as if this situation tired him more than it confused him. "Mom arrived 15 minutes late," he said evenly. "Mia is right. Your presence does not fit the atmosphere of the party." No one in the room objected, and it was that silence that made me understand this was not spontaneous. It had already been accepted, at least in their minds. I looked around the table. Old friends of mine were scattered among the guests. Some had worked with me for more than 30 years. Some I had helped through the hardest periods of their lives. They were not loud people, but I could see the change on their faces. Not anger, disappointment. Megan squeezed my hand gently. Very gently, she whispered, almost without sound. "Maybe we should just go home, dear." That hurt more than any insult. Not because it was weak, but because it was familiar. All her life she had been used to stepping aside, keeping the peace, not troubling anyone. But that night I knew that if we stood up and left quietly, this would happen again. Not just to us. I stood up. I did not tap a glass. I did not raise my voice. I simply stood straight the way I had when making the hardest decisions of my life. I placed my hand on the back of my wife's chair and helped her stand. I did not look at Mia. I looked at Ethan. "I understand," I said. "If our presence is a problem, then we will not make anyone uncomfortable any longer." I thought someone might sigh with relief. But no, the silence remained. What happened next was not part of anyone's plan. An old friend of mine stood up, then another. No one said a word. They put on their coats, nodded to me and Megan. Chairs scraped, glasses left half full on the table. The Miller family began looking at one another, confused. Mia turned to her mother, then to Ethan. She forced a smile. For the first time that evening, she seemed to realize something was slipping out of her control. In less than 2 minutes, half the table was empty. There was no arguing, no accusations, just slow, deliberate footsteps leaving the room. I heard someone whisper behind us, "We should not stay." When Megan and I stepped outside, the cool New York evening air made her shiver slightly. I draped my coat over her shoulders. She said nothing, but I knew she was trying to stay composed. Behind us, the restaurant lights were still bright. That lavish birthday party continued, at least on the surface. But I knew that, from that moment on, something had cracked. Not our dignity, but the polished illusion they believed was untouchable. That night, as the car pulled away from Central Park, I did not think about revenge. I thought about only one thing. If my silence had made them this confident, then it was time for them to hear the truth. And the truth, when revealed at the right moment, always has its own way of closing doors that were once opened with arrogance. On the way home, Megan rested her head against the window, her eyes closed. I did not ask anything. There are moments when questions only make things heavier. The city kept moving outside, lights reflecting across her face, tired but resigned. The silence in the car was not uncomfortable. It felt like a necessary pause, before a person is forced to look back at a very long road. That night after Megan had fallen asleep, I sat alone in my small study. Old habits returned without effort. I opened a drawer and took out a folder I had not touched in years, not because I needed to prove anything. But after that evening, I needed to be sure I still remembered who I was, and how I had made it here. Ethan was not always like this. There was a time when he called me every weekend just to ask how to handle some small problem at work. When he decided to move to New York, I did not object. I simply did my part quietly, the way I had done for decades. The apartment in Manhattan did not appear by chance. My name was never on it. I did not show up at any celebration dinners. The money passed through an old family trust, under a third party's name. I chose that path because I believed that if my son did not feel directly indebted, he would live more freely. Looking back now, that may have been my first mistake. Mia's company was the same. The early plans were sent to me for advice. I gave very little input, but the initial capital was substantial. I believed that quiet support would help them focus on building something real instead of being consumed by the need to prove themselves to the world. Close to midnight, my phone vibrated softly. A message from my personal attorney. He was not someone who contacted me late, unless something truly mattered. "I think you should review the documents on the northern land your in-laws are developing," the message said. "Some details match your trust." I read the line twice. Then I opened my laptop. That property was not unfamiliar. I had heard Ethan mention it a few times with pride in his voice. A large resort project heavily promoted tied to the Miller family name, but the numbers in the documents told a different story. The development rights, and part of the assets, still belonged to an old trust. A trust where I was the sole beneficiary. Not because I wanted control, simply because everything had been set up long ago for situations I had hoped would never come. I sat there for a long time, not to calculate, but to understand. To understand that their confidence did not come from their own strength alone. It was built on foundations they had never stopped to ask about, or who actually held the keys. The next morning, when Megan woke up, I made tea for her. She looked at me, as if she wanted to ask something, then stopped. I told her everything would be fine. This time, I was not reassuring her. I was speaking because I could finally see the picture clearly. A few days later, I received another call. This time, my attorney's voice was heavier. He spoke about some recent medical documents related to Megan. Small changes, harmless on the surface, but enough to create doubt if someone chose to interpret them a certain way. I did not get angry. I just felt cold. Megan had undergone a minor procedure. Everything was clear and transparent. But the fact that someone had interfered with her records, even on paper, told me they had thought further ahead than I expected. Not out of concern for her health, but to question her clarity, her right to decide. That evening I told Megan slowly. I did not add anything. I did not draw conclusions. She listened, her hand resting on her teacup, eyes fixed on the garden outside. When I finished, she simply nodded. "I understand now," she said. "So they do not just want us to stay quiet." There was no bitterness in her voice, just confirmation of what I had already begun to accept. I called my attorney back. This time I did not ask. "Is there a problem?" I asked. "What do we need to do to put everything back where it belongs? Not to punish, but to stop it." In the days that followed, I did not contact Ethan. I let things move forward on their momentum. The meetings, the contracts, the photos posted with confident smiles. I knew they were moving fast, and it was that speed that would keep them from seeing what was waiting ahead. One evening, as I closed the final folder, I thought back to that moment in the restaurant. The look in Ethan's eyes when he said, "We did not fit." At the time, I thought I was simply leaving a party. Now I understand. That was the moment I stepped away from the role of the patient father, and prepared to step back in. Not to demand affection, but to remind them that some foundations cannot be dismissed simply because the one who holds them chose silence for too long. I did not appear right away. Silence, when held long enough, gives people a dangerous kind of confidence. In the days that followed, I watched from a distance. Ethan and Mia went on with their lives, as if that birthday party had left no cracks behind. New photos appeared regularly. Captions about vision growth, a major turning point. They were preparing for an important signing ceremony with international investors, an event promoted as proof that they had truly joined the ranks of the successful. I knew that ceremony because my name was on the guest list, not as Ethan's father, but as the head of the legal entity with final decision-making authority. That morning, I put on an old suit, not the kind people post online, just what I have always worn when making long-term decisions. Megan walked me to the door. She did not ask what I was going to do. She only said softly, "Do what you believe is right." The ceremony took place in a large conference room, glass walls overlooking the city. Everything was perfectly arranged. Background music at just the right level. Handshakes at the right moments. Mia stood at the center, confident, comfortable under the attention. Ethan stood beside her, nodding often like someone used to being recognized. When I walked in, no one noticed right away. I chose a seat in the back row. I was not there to impress anyone. I was there to end a chain of misunderstandings. The presentation began. Figures appeared on the large screen. I listened carefully, not because I needed to understand them, but because I wanted to know what they believed in. Every plan rested on one assumption, that the resources would always be there, steady, unconditional. When it was time for the signing, the moderator invited a representative of the largest stakeholder to say a few words. The room fell quiet. I stood up. I heard a few murmurs. Some people recognized me. Others did not. Ethan turned around. His eyes lingered on me longer than necessary. Mia hesitated slightly but kept her smile. "I will be brief," I said. My voice carried more clearly than I expected. Not about vision, about reality. I did not look at the screen. I looked at them. I introduced myself with a title that had never appeared in their family photos. I spoke about ownership percentages, about decision rights, about clauses they had signed, perhaps without ever reading carefully. No one interrupted me, not out of politeness, but because they were beginning to sense that something had drifted off script. I moved to the second part. Documents were distributed, not to embarrass anyone, just for comparison. Unclear expenses, signatures appearing where they should not have been. I did not name any wrongdoing. I simply asked questions. Ethan looked down at the table. Mia was no longer smiling. I spoke very slowly. Each sentence had a pause. I did not need to convince anyone. The numbers did that on their own. Investors began exchanging looks, not tense, just cautious. "I am not here to shame anyone," I said. "I am here to clarify boundaries. The boundary between support and dependence, between trust and misuse, between family and interest. I announced the withdrawal of all capital tied to projects associated with the Miller family. No raised voice, no threats, just a decision delivered like countless others I had made in my life." The room grew quiet in a different way. No excitement, no applause, just faces recalculating everything. Mia turned to Ethan. This time there was no confidence in her eyes, only a question. Ethan had no answer. I ended with one simple sentence. "When the foundation changes, everything built on it must be reconsidered." I sat down. I did not wait for reactions. I did not wait for explanations. The ceremony ended earlier than planned. Handshakes became hurried. Conversations were cut short. I left first while the room was still adjusting its breathing. Outside the sky was overcast. I stood there for a moment watching people pass by. There was no sense of victory, only a quiet relief like closing a door you had left open for far too long. That evening, Ethan called me. I did not answer, not because I did not want to talk, but because some things, if spoken too soon, become nothing more than excuses. I knew that from that moment on the first pieces had begun to fall. Not loudly, not dramatically, just the natural consequence of a structure built on misunderstanding finally facing the true weight of itself. After that ceremony, I did not need to follow the news to know what was happening. Real change rarely shows up in headlines. It happens quietly, in calls that go unanswered, in meetings postponed without a new date, in the eyes of people who once rushed to greet you. Ethan called several times the following week. I let the phone ring until it went silent, not because I was angry, but because I knew that if I answered, then we would only talk about feelings. And feelings cannot fix what has been placed in the wrong position. Mia was different. She did not call. She sent messages, short, polished, exactly the way someone used to controlling appearances would write. At first, polite questions, then longer explanations. Finally, impatience disguised as reason. I did not reply to a single one. One rainy afternoon, while I was watering the plants in the yard, Megan stepped onto the porch and said, "They're at the door." I looked up. The familiar car was parked unevenly under the tree. Ethan stood there without a coat. Mia stood beside him, arms crossed. The rain was not heavy, but enough to make standing still uncomfortable. I did not rush. I turned off the hose and set it neatly aside. Some things lose their meaning if done too quickly. Megan looked at me waiting. I shook my head. She understood at once. She went back inside and closed the door softly, not to hide, but to keep this house the last quiet place we still had. I stood behind the glass door watching. Ethan knocked. Once, then again. I did not open it. Through the fogged glass I saw Mia say something. Ethan lowered his head. They stood there slowly, getting wet, no longer looking as composed as usual. I felt no satisfaction, only a quiet contrast between the way they once let my wife stand outside a dinner party and the way they were now standing outside a life they had assumed was guaranteed. Finally, I opened the door just a little, not to invite them in, just enough to speak. "What is it?" I asked. Ethan looked at me. His eyes were red. From the rain or from something else, I could not tell. He spoke quickly, as if afraid I would close the door again. He talked about misunderstandings, about pressure, about rushed decisions. Mia stood beside him, nodding often, adding a few carefully prepared apologies. I listened. I did not interrupt, but I did not respond right away. "When your mother and I were asked to leave," I said at last, "you did not see a problem. Now that things are no longer convenient, you come looking for us." I did not raise my voice. I simply stated what had happened. Mia opened her mouth, then stopped. Perhaps for the first time she realized that some doors cannot be opened with words. "I am not opening the door today," I said. "Not to punish anyone, but to give you time to think about what truly matters." I closed the door again. I did not lock it, but I did not open it further. They stood there a while longer. Then they left. No dramatic pleading. No promises. Just two figures disappearing into the rain. In the weeks that followed, everything moved quickly, quietly, but clearly. The Miller family began to struggle. Projects were put on hold. Assets once considered secure were suddenly reviewed again. No one called it a collapse, but everyone understood that a long stretch of smooth fortune had ended. The Manhattan apartment was no longer in Ethan's name. His work became fragile. Relationships that once felt close grew distant. No one spoke badly of him. They simply stopped being enthusiastic. And in the world Ethan lived in, indifference was sometimes heavier than rejection. Mia went silent on social media. The luxury photos appeared less often. The parties disappeared. I did not follow any of it, but people still talked, not out of curiosity, but because they too were learning the difference between image and reality. One morning, Megan and I sat at the small kitchen table. She asked a question I knew would come eventually. "Do you regret it?" she asked. I thought for a moment, then shook my head. I only regret staying silent for too long. I decided to do something I had considered before. Not to assert power, but to redefine it. I transferred all the assets, once intended for Ethan, into a new fund. A fund to support education and health care for the elderly. I named it after Megan. When I told her, she was surprised. Then she smiled. Not a proud smile, a relieved one, like something had finally been returned to where it belonged. "My name?" she asked. "Because you represent everything they failed to see," I said. I did not inform Ethan. I did not need to. Some decisions do not need to be understood right away. They only need to be made at the right time. And in that silence, I felt one thing very clearly. The price of arrogance is not material loss. It is the moment a person realizes that the true values were traded away long ago, just to secure a temporary place in rooms that were never meant to belong to them. After everything settled, our small house returned to its familiar rhythm. In the mornings, Megan made tea. I watered the plants. We did not talk about what had happened, but we both knew we had entered a different chapter. Quieter, without announcements, simply lighter. The fund in Megan's name began operating slowly. No grand ceremonies, no speeches, just documents signed where they belonged, brief phone calls, and quiet visits to senior care centers. Megan's name was not displayed on any plaque. She simply showed up, sat beside them, and listened. Watching her, I realized something simple. Respect does not come from a title. It comes from how a person shows up. We decided to leave the city, not to run away, but because it was time to choose a place that did not demand we prove anything. The small coastal town welcomed us with salty air and long afternoons. There, people greeted each other with eye contact, not questions about work or bank accounts. I repaired an old wooden house. Megan planted flowers. Everything moved slowly, exactly as we needed. Once, while I was repainting the fence, a neighbor stopped by and asked what I used to do. I answered briefly. I worked long enough. He smiled, nodded, and started talking about the weather. The conversation ended there. I felt at ease. Ethan called me after a few months. His voice was different, less rushed, less confident. He did not offer a long apology. He just said he was trying to put things back in order. I listened without interrupting. When he asked if I had any advice, I said the only thing I truly believed. Start with small things, and take responsibility all the way through. We did not set a meeting, not because I refused, but because some distances must be closed with action, not words. I believed that if Ethan truly changed, we would see it. No forcing required. Megan sent him a postcard. No reproach. Just a few lines about the sea, about the new flower beds. She always believed that kindness, when held properly, could open doors that logic never could. One evening we sat on the front steps watching the sun go down. Megan asked if I thought I had been too hard. I thought for a long time. Then I said I think I was on time. Not all justice needs noise. Some justice only needs order restored. I no longer think of that birthday party as a wound. It feels more like a marker. Because of it, I understood that prolonged silence can be mistaken for agreement, and respect, if not protected, will be taken lightly. From time to time, I receive thank you letters from people the fund has helped. The handwriting is unpolished but sincere. I do not reply to all of them. I keep them in a drawer as a reminder that the right decisions do not need an audience. Megan grows stronger every day. She walks farther. She laughs more. I feel the same, not because we won, but because we chose what was worth keeping. If there is one thing I would say to those listening to this story, it is this. Money can buy you a seat at expensive tables, but it can never buy respect or love within a family. Those are built over time. In how you treat people when no one is watching. In standing by each other when silence would be easier. And if you see your parents as a burden, pause for a moment. Look again. That quiet presence may be the foundation keeping your life from tipping over. I learned that lesson close to 70. I hope you do not have to wait that long.